Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So normally the raid lore from old reprised raids doesn't change much, and also I'm not talking about a lot of stuff that's new because obviously it's been out before. And, you know, for the most part with these reprised raids, it's also something where I like to go in sequence. You know, that's why previously we were covering the Great Disaster, and that was preceded by Crota getting exiled. You know, all of this stuff is basically sitting here because I want to give you a more coherent story. This time, in Crota's End, though, there is something that's making me break that just a little bit. So, for this raid lore video, I'm going just a little bit out of sync, and I want to talk about something totally ridiculous that's been added to the lore, which is fascinating, and it comes in the form of Necrochasm, the new Necrochasm. It's got a ton of weird and wild implications in this lore that are so strange that I'm not even sure how all of it connects quite yet. The entire thing relates to the boss from the Last Word exotic mission in Destiny 2, a series-bound station which I believe to be A113, aka the Cocytus Apertures, and maybe involves the Nine or some other mysterious voice from far beyond which may have been the mastermind behind the Weapons of Sorrow. Though, again, I'm not sure. I need to let every one of you know before we start this that anything I talk about today, whilst it is related to the lore of the Necrochasm that's just dropped in Destiny 2, I need everyone to know there is some stuff here that is clearly unexplored, and clearly I'm going to be talking just a little bit of theory and prediction here. So don't take anything I say completely as gospel when I talk about the predictions that we're making. Regardless, the lore today is weird, it's wild, and it's not well defined. So we're going to figure out what's going on as we talk about the Necrochasm and its brand new lore. So let's start by reading this lore tab and then we'll break it down bit by bit. Of course, this lore tab is different from the old Necrochasm Grimoire card, and its implications couldn't be more different. Just go ahead and take a listen. Is your light bright enough to stand in full gaze of the Hive's abyss? Arise for Crota, son of Oryx, the Hope Eater. He who has seized the sky layer above Ceres, which peers into other planes. Now vassal to the might of the World Breaker. Within these keyholes, our brood communes with unheard voices. They who whisper that the curse of our thralls is a blessing granted by the deep. Now, in honor of the God Knight, we fashion these gluttonous whispers into death. His hellmouth becomes home to the profane, the corpse of the sky, reborn in the abyss. Enkar, the Anointed. So it doesn't sound like too much to begin with, it just sounds like a quote from a random hive called Enkar. But here's the real question, which we should start with. Who the hell is Enkar the Anointed? That's where this gets fascinating. Enkar is the final boss enemy that you face in the Last Word exotic quest in Destiny 2. The mission and the quest attached to it are kind of wild, they involve Weapons of Sorrow very heavily, and Enkar is actually one who has supposedly crafted the Weapons of Sorrow, or at least has crafted some of them. And even more troubling, you should remember that Enkar was that enemy that you faced in the Last Word quest where you had to shoot their gun. What was their weapon, by the way? Oh yeah, we don't know what it's called, but it sure looks like some kind of proto-thorn. Yeah, I'm going to need to explain Weapons of Sorrow here if we're going to understand Enkar's role in all this. So yeah, let's go over that really quickly. Weapons of Sorrow, according to the original Necrochasm Grimoire card, are a thing of myth, a manifestation of humanity's mastery of war merged with dark hive magics. The technical definitions of such weapons aren't always made clear, but it's clear that Thorn is the most famous, joined in its infamy by Necrochasm, the Touch of Malice, and most recently Osteostriga. All of these weapons are terrible things to behold, with the power of Thorn in particular being enough to snuff out the light of a Guardian completely. But more threatening than this power is the aura of sickening corruption that seems to twist many Guardians that find these weapons. Most notorious amongst those that have fallen is undoubtedly Dredgen Yor, the original wielder of Thorn and the inspiration for the shadows of Yor that would follow in his wake. So, how does Enkar fit into all of this? Well, as it turns out, he's a Hive weapon master, an acolyte who has been anointed as such. Now keep in mind, when I say Hive Weapon Master, I don't mean that he's a master of using these weapons, you understand. Enkar is a master weapon crafter. During the Season of the Forge, we went on a quest for the Last Word exotic hand cannon. The quest for the Last Word isn't actually so much to do with the Last Word as it is to do with Weapons of Sorrow. We start this because the Drifter finds an ancient Hive artifact that he believes is related to the Weapons of Sorrow, and originally, when presenting it to us, he also offers us the page of something called the Book of Unmaking. It is better known as the fabled manuscript created by the Shadows of Yore, and a guide to their process of creating a new thorn and becoming one of them. It is known as the Seventh Book of Sorrow. As we further investigated, the Book of Unmaking demanded that we should feed the artifact light from fellow Guardians. The Crucible was our avenue to accomplish this. When the artifact was charged with the light of other Guardians, it would start to call out to something in the darkness. We followed its call to Titan, and there we found an acolyte called the Servant of the Betrothed. Now this is likely to be a reference to a wizard that was originally corrupted by Dredgen Yor. It's revealed in the process of this quest that the wizard, Zayor, was betrothed to Enkar, the Hive Weapon Master. At least that's what the Drifter and the quest steps seem to say. Now, it should also be noted that if that's true, this isn't the first time Zayor has been betrothed, and by the looks of things, Zayor died before she could be married off to Enkar. Zayor was originally betrothed, supposedly, to a Hive Knight that was killed by Razorlazir in the Hellmouth. This was the Guardian who would one day become Dredgen Yor, and the weapon that killed the Hive Knight was the Rose, which would one day morph into the Thorn. The murder of the Hive Knight would change Zayor's title from Zayor the Betrothed to Zayor the Unwed. We would later kill and conquer Zayor in the course of Destiny 1, meaning that perhaps the dark union between her and Enkar was proposed, but never actually managed to take place. This would imply that Enkar was the replacement for the Hive Knight that had been felled all those years ago. And that might make sense. Enkar is of a worthy station, but also is a character that's been around for long enough that this is entirely within the realm of possibility. These characters, regardless of their relations and who was in union with who died at what point, all of them represent a dark web of power, all intimately linked to the corruption of Dredgen Yor and the creation of the Weapons of Sorrow. The only difference is now that Enkar is the only one who is still alive. Their exact role in the story isn't made perfectly clear. No one's role is, but for that of Dredgen Yor and Shin Malphur and Jaren Ward in the story that we seem to now know more and more about. Regardless, the hazy chronology and unreliable narrators don't change the fact that upon defeating the Servant of the Betrothed, we discovered something more. A Guardian's helmet that had been shattered upon impact by a weapon. And we did indeed find the thing that shattered it as well. A single giant hand cannon bullet in the shape of a stake. One that could clearly only be fired by a single weapon, one that is characteristic of it. Thorn. It turns out that the original artifact that the Drifter had given us was part of a ritual that the Hive were conducting here. A ritual that was meant to perfect the Weapons of Sorrow. The shattered helmet was proof of their efficacy. Not only had they succeeded in creating new thorns, new weapons of sorrow that would haunt the Guardians once more, but also, some of those weapons were now out in circulation. There was no way now to stop other thorns from being discovered and used. They were once again a part of Destiny's world. With this discovery, our next course of action was clear. We had to hunt down Enkar, the Hive Weapon Master, who was responsible for these creations. And we would eventually find him in the Tangled Shore, within the carcass of an old destroyed Hive cruiser known as the Jetsam of Saturn. Whilst it's never confirmed, the name seems to imply that this old cruiser was one that was destroyed in the initial conflict between the Awoken and Oryx's fleet that's known as the Battle of Saturn. When we discovered Enkar's lair, deep within the gorge nearby, we would face a fearsome challenge. It was clear that Enkar wielded something of terrifying power. It can only be described as a proto-thorn. It looks like a thorn, or an acolyte's shredder, that has been fused together with a weapon of sorrow, Thorn itself. Take a look at it in these images. It was only thanks to the sudden appearance of the Last Word itself that we had a weapon of equal magnitude to match that of Enkar, and it still required a swift gun hand. So the role of this anointed acolyte is made clear. He was a crafter of weapons of sorrow, at very least the second generation of Thorns, one that now has circulated amongst the Guardians. And whilst he was only a part of the mechanism that created these menacing tools of darkness, he certainly had quite the hand to play in it. It appears that with this new lore tab, Enkar might have also had a hand in the creation of the Necrochasm as well. The last paragraph of the lore tab implies that the weapon was created in honor of Crota and was forged within the Hellmouth itself. So now we know who Enkar is and we understand his role in this all a little better, but even then we don't see the actual story end there. Instead, we see the lore tab talking about other things, and it does appear that the inspiration behind Necrochasm in particular came from dark whispers found in the keyhole of a sky layer above Ceres. Those dark whispers seemingly were the things that inspired the Cursed Thrall explosive trait that makes the Necrochasm what it is. And with that being said, there's something more that we need to tap into on that particular front of things, because there is a very strange description given of this place. It supposedly peers into other planes, it was captured by Crota, it was previously some kind of layer of the sky. What does all that mean? It sounds like a little bit of gibberish, but I believe I know exactly what is being referenced here. A113, also known as the last coordinates of the dead orbit ship known as the Sophia, which is known to have docked at a station of a similar description. The reference to the station as being a sky layer might be a reference to the fact that this was a Golden Age station, but it could also reference what was within. The Vanguard designates these platforms as the Awoken designated them long ago, by another name, Cocytus. Cocytus, by the way, is a fitting name for this, as it's the name for one of the rivers in Greek mythology that flows into the underworld of Hades. Let me read you a little bit of the stolen intelligence from the Vanguard so that you can get a better idea of what this station is that seemingly has linked now into the Necrochasm. Sensitive. Contents below sniffed from encrypted reef datacoms. Sensitive. 1. We are maintaining our containment posture at Cocytus. I assess no immediate danger to the system, and we have enough firepower to destroy the station and its mechanisms remotely if the on-site warhead fails. The station remains in the stable heliocentric orbit where it was parked after the destruction of Ceres. 2. I do not ask confirmation of these theories, and in fact I beg you not to address them, but I have reviewed the site records, and the fate of the Sophia's crew after they were herded to Cocytus stinks of hive madness. The Cocytus apertures must, at the time, have opened into a hive manifold associated with Crota. Whatever their original purpose, when Crota established his presence in the system, they became conduits into hell, and the Sophia crew's ugly end proved it. Whoever drove the Sophia to its doom then installed the Cocytus instruments around their Golden Age facility to study Crota's manifold. 3. Crota is dead. His hold on these gates has passed. Now something else is trying to pass through into our world. But it is so alien, and its sending so bafflingly malformed, that I fear this can only end in madness. So that intelligence was originally stolen from the Awoken by the Vanguard and was then stolen from the Vanguard by either us or the Drifter, and if we did steal it from the Vanguard ourselves, it was probably at the Drifter's direction. Ironic that they call him the criminal. Anyway, it's pointed out here that the Cocytus station held gateways, keyholes, apertures, whatever you call them, and somehow they linked outwards into different planes, as the Hive called them, different dimensions and places. Clearly, it was capable of linking into what might be an ascendant space, or some parallel space that is of similar control. Crota was able to connect the station and its apertures into his own manifold, and his brood wrested control of it from all others. We know also, thanks to the old grimoire, that the crew of the dead orbit vessel Sophia did indeed land on the station as is reported in that entry there, when it was under the control of Crota, and they did look into the Cocytus gateways. Universally, the crew that did this went mad. Only the captain, I believe, remains. But this still doesn't easily tell us what the apertures truly connected to, because the Hive stated that they heard whispers from within the keyholes of the facility, which could honestly mean anything. So I guess that's really our next question. Who whispered all of this? Well, I think there are 4 possibilities. I think that the whispers could have come directly from Crota, the whispers could have come from the Witness itself, the whispers could have come from the Nine of all places, or there could be some other malevolent force behind all of this. Running through all of those possibilities really quickly, when the Hive did capture the station, they did link it into Crota's manifold, and it's entirely possible that the whispers that Enkar and his brood heard were simply whispers from Crota himself. This seems like the most straightforward of possibilities, but the thing is we don't know where these gateways and keyholes and apertures actually lead and what they actually link into, because ultimately, the Hive manifold, as it's put, is not necessarily a well-defined term. Manifold could simply be something that is related to Crota's general domain of control. It could be his throne world directly, or it could be something completely different. It's not clear. What I would say, though, is that Crota whispering the creation directly might make a certain degree of sense. After all, for the entirety of the time that Dredgen Yor was walking within the Hellmouth, he would have been walking within the domain of Crota's influence, as well as the other Hive that occupied the Hellmouth at that time. Crota has always been Lord of the Hellmouth up until the point at which we shattered him, and shattered the control of his brood. Then again, we also have something more to consider when we look into this as well. There is also the possibility that the whispers, which are so nebulous, simply came from the Witness. It's entirely possible that this is just another manipulation of the Witness, and the reason for that is because it fits with the Witness's entire modus operandi. Remember that corrupting Guardians is something that the Witness has attempted to undertake in our more present timeline. It offered us the power of stasis, and when it did, it came with the possibility of corruption. Corruption that we had to control, and to maintain control over. The Witness is also known to communicate from beyond many dimensional boundaries too, so it's not impossible that the Witness would have used this momentary lapse within the manifolds and the gateways at Cocytus in order to communicate its desires to Enkar and the rest of the Hive brood that had recently claimed the apertures. Then again, that's pushing it a little bit because that seems a little involved. Maybe it's also something that doesn't quite fit with the time, because at this moment the Traveler had not truly awakened yet again, and therefore the Witness and its pyramid ships had not truly been summoned back. They had not been made aware of it all. It's worth remembering as well that the portals after this point were taken over by a different force and eventually were used to link to the Nine. When the Nine did have control over the Cocytus apertures, there was a story about how someone went through and experienced the Nine in their true form. It's also speculated that the experiments that walked out of the gateway after Crota had lost control of it were related to the Nine and eventually led up to the creation of Xur. But again, that's all quite speculative and it's not entirely clear. All of these fascinating details aside, it points to the most sinister idea of all, that there is something else beyond what we have seen thus far, something malignant that sits within the apertures and that whispered the designs, at very least for necrochasm, into the mind of Enkar. With that in mind, there is a really sinister possibility. The weapons of sorrow may have been the labor of Enkar and Dredgen Yor and the Shadows of Yor, Xio the Unwed and many others, but the machinations that gave the inspiration to forge the necrochasm and those like it, they came from elsewhere. It isn't clear who, because the chronology of Destiny's timeline isn't perfect, and there are all sorts of different individuals that might have had an influence over the weapons of sorrow, but there is also the chance that there is a fourth entity that could have controlled this process and could have whispered its inspiration from beyond. There are many possible figures that could have driven this home. I do still think that Crota is the most likely. It is the Occam's razor solution, but the reality is we just don't know. Enkar may have masterminded the second generation of Thorns and Necrochasm, but the inspiration for it, the requirement, was whispered through the apertures, and we do not know who whispered it. Either way, the point is this. Whoever did whisper the inspiration for Necrochasm to Enkar and Crota's Hive We do not know them just yet, and we should be wary of them. If there is someone else out there, then the story of the Weapons of Sorrow might not truly be over. Whether this is another hive or whether this is someone else, it's unclear, but I think it is worth keeping it all in mind because there is an evolving story behind the Weapons of Sorrow that still moves to this day. There is a 7th Book of Sorrow, yes, it was created by the Shadows of Yore, but now there are others out there who are revising it. The 7th Revision of Sorrow, as it's known, led to the creation of both the Necrotic Grips and Osteostriga, which have been some of the most powerful weapons of Sorrow that have ever existed. I consider the gauntlets a weapon given that their touch is enough to spread the malicious poison and rot all on their own. But either way, again, it leads you to that question. Is there something that caused this inspiration, and is there an evolving story here? If so, it's fascinating to see what's happened here. The Necrochasm has unveiled what could be Destiny's next big mystery, and a continuation of a story that started long ago with the Thorn. It's entirely possible that if Crota was the one who whispered this inspiration, that this loop has already been closed and the story is already over. But I don't know. Bungie often leads story threads quite loose, and the Osteostriga's thread is a little looser than I might like it. With all that being said, there is a connection to all of these entities. The Nine, the Weapons of Sorrow, Dead Orbit, the Awoken, Crota and his brood. All of them have seemingly gone through the Cocytus apertures and the station attached to it at some point. And what's more, we've never visited it for ourselves. What lies beyond those gateways is a mystery. But wherever they lead, through one of those keyholes into one of those realities, if aligned correctly, a malicious force may once have lurked. Perhaps it lurks there still, waiting to whisper corrupting words to yet more unfortunate souls that should gaze upon the keyhole between dimensions at the heart of A113. But that's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, and let me know what you think. The entire story here could be tied up neatly in a bow if the whispers simply came from Crota out of his own manifold. But I don't know if it is, and the Weapons of Sorrow seem to have taken on a life of their own. The inspiration point here is something that seems so specific to Raze, and it does expand on the story just a little bit more. I'd love to see more, but again, there's no concrete confirmation, so let me know what you think down below in the comments. Of course, if you do want more Destiny content, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.